Hey, glare everywhere. Hey, my friends. I have not been making a lot of videos lately because I have not had my favorite summer ever. But here we are. Can I? Whoops, that's not the way I wanted this to go. Anyway, hi, hey. So I just thought it would be a good time to do a video and share just some updates about what's going on in Tom Benjamin land. And also I promised, and I don't really know that anyone cares whether I do it or not, but I said at some point that I was going to do a Thoth Girl Summer update and just sort of talk a little bit about that experience. So I'll just combine these two things, and you can come for the ride, and welcome to the craziness. So, what do we want to start with? Well, the most important thing to start with is my new book. So, the next book that I'm going to release is called The Modern Fortune Teller's Field Guide. At least that's what it's called currently. Who knows? And it's the first book that I decided not to self-publish. And there's a few reasons for that. I'm very proud of the work that I self-published, so this is not like an altering of my, my sense of like what I do, right? But I self-published my first two books. I self-published my first book because I felt like it was such a niche thing that there probably wouldn't be a lot of market for it, and I wasn't super confident anyway. And I also kind of wanted to do it myself. Like, I wanted that experience, and I think... I think I'm pretty proud of it. I am pretty proud of it. And then the second book, I thought about trying to get published, but as I began exploring that option, I realized that it wasn't in alignment with kind of where I wanted to go with that book. And in both cases, I felt like I didn't want to have to change what I was trying to do to make it more marketable. And so in the space between the last book, which was Your Tarot Toolkit, ironically, Llewellyn, I did submit that book to Llewellyn through a friend. And before they even looked at the proposal, they said, we don't do intermediate books. No one wants them. And so... I said, okay, fine. And then, like, a year or two later, at some point, I found out they were actually publishing a book with the same title, which is out there. I haven't looked at it. It's not the author's fault, you know what I mean? And I sort of wish Llewellyn had thought to say, well, hey, we have a book with that same title. Maybe we want to think about that. But no, whatever. Titles can't be copyrighted, so... Anyway, I kind of ended the attempt to get a mainstream publisher for Your Tarot Toolkit, just because I was like, I had a good experience with the last one. The new one, in the space between that and now, there's been a couple publishers that have come to my attention whose work that I've really admired, and so I started to think maybe there is an audience or a sort of traditional publishing route for this next book. And I wrote the book kind of with that in mind. And I settled on Crossed Crow Publishing, which is new-ish. And they have a lot of good stuff. And I happen to know someone who works there who I trust. And I think there was another publisher I was looking at too, both equally. And I think, well, I know why I went with Crossed Crow when they made the offer was, and I'm very lucky, by the way, to have gotten offers for this book. They are very author-centric. They want to work with the author on the look of the book. They sent me literally like a form to fill out with like, what, if you could have the cover of this book look whatever whatever you would want it to, what would it look like? And they, most publishers will ask about like, what's your marketing plan, but you sort of feel like you're on your own there, you know what I mean? And like, and that is the case with a lot of traditional publishers. They publish the book. It's your job as the author to get people to buy it. And with a smaller publisher, I felt like I would be less kind of alone in that. And I just really like the things that they're publishing. I would love to see a more diverse author pool for them, but they're new, right? So we're thinking forward, and the staff, the company itself is very representational of global majority and queerness and whatnot. So those were all reasons why I landed there, and very happy so far that I did. And so, new book coming out. The only downside really to traditional publishing is that it's going to be like another year before you see the book. So it should be out about this time next year. So a little bit of a wait, but a year will pass quickly. It certainly in my world does, because of age. So that's the biggest and most exciting news is the new book and working with Crossed Crow, and very, very excited for you to see it. What's the book about? It's about tarot primarily, but not exclusively. It references other kinds of divination too, notably Lenormand and bone casting. And the point of the book really is threefold. Like, I call it 3 books in one. The first point is to kind of continue the conversation about what I call kind of like engaged fortune telling, by which I mean a recognition that if you're going to read whatever for anybody, that you really do have to engage in the world around you and understand, all the things that people are going to face. You know what I mean? And it's very kind of anti-toxic positivity. It's very kind of pro realism about the things that impact people's lives, right? So it asks us to engage our internal biases. So that's part of it, and part, it's not going to be anything surprising if you've been here for a minute. You'll know that I really do believe that for us to be responsible, ethical readers, we need to understand that, positive thinking isn't the only, and in many cases is not even a possible solution, right? So that's part of it, is the kind of like social engagement, toxic positivity piece. The other part of it is kind of a reclaiming of the fortune teller name and role. And that's the thing that's been kind of increasingly important to me in the last few years as well. And so that's part of it. And what does it mean to be a fortune teller in 2024? And what's the job? What's the responsibility? And then the third part is really just doing better readings and how to be engaged with the world, thinking like a reader, thinking like a fortune teller. There's some big chunks about dealing with ego. There's a chapter on teaching, and there's a chapter on learning. Because even if you never want to teach tarot or divination, doing a reading for someone is an act of sharing information, right? And so we go through how people learn and retain information, so that even if you don't want to teach, you've got a sense of how people remember. And I'm really, really excited about it, and I just can't wait for it to be in the world. And I'm very excited because the person who agreed to do the introduction is awesome, and so more on that soon. But I'll keep everyone posted, in the few months between now and next year, this time next year. So that's big news, and very, very excited about it. And if you don't know Crossed Crow, which you should, but if you don't, go check them out on Instagram and social media everywhere, and check out some of their books. I just finished, I can't remember the name of it because I gave it to a friend, but I just finished a book that they literally just released about working with invasive plants in magical work, and just such a brilliant, I think there could be like 3 more volumes of that book. So really, just really interesting stuff coming out of there. So that's that's news one. News two is that if you don't want to wait a year for more of my writing, you don't have to. Because if you have not seen in the comments or the descriptions of my videos lately, I have a new blog called The Fool's Journal, which I think is still the name of this YouTube channel, although I kind of think it's mostly Tom Benjamin now. I can't remember. But the blog, I'm having a lot of fun doing. It's I release it every Tuesday evening, Eastern time. And it's lessons on the tarot from the tarot. And basically every week I just draw a spread of cards asking, what's this week's lesson? You know, last week was lesson 13. What's lesson 13? Next week will be lesson 14. And I just let the cards give me a lesson about being a reader, about divination, about working with the cards. So I've been doing this since June, I think, and we're on week 13. And I don't think I've missed a week yet, but I will. Rest assured. But that's been a lot of fun to do, and I've always wanted to do a blog, but I just never really felt like I had the right idea. So, link to that down below. Other writing news is that I also this year did 3 free ebooks that you can find on my homepage. If you go to tombenjamintarot.com and just go to the bottom, you'll see the 3 of them there. The first is just kind of, it actually is tangential to what we're going to talk about next, which is the Thoth stuff. And that is called Thoth on Earth. And it's just a brief, like, little, it was really just a thing that I was doing for myself, just taking notes on like how to integrate the Thoth keywords or titles into my readings, because they often have a very different affect or tenor or meaning from how I read, typically, given the sort of element and the number. So there's that, and just a little bit of kind of an exploration of my feelings on that deck. The second one is called How to Get a Reading. And it's for anyone who's what I call tri-curious and has always wanted a reading but doesn't kind of know what the procedure is or the etiquette is. And it's really just, it's a little bit of myth-busting. It's a lot about how I read, but it's also very much about how, like, I would love it if people would approach the process, and, like, you as a client are the person I'm here for, you know what I mean? And so my job is to kind of advocate to get you what you need, not necessarily what you want, but what you need. And so it's just about, like, how to get a good reading, you know what I mean? And how to know whether the reader that you've chosen is a good choice for you. You know, it's about how some readers will read about things that other people won't, and vice versa. So, that's there. And I also, you know, I think it's also helpful for people who are like, I kind of want to get into reading for others, professionally or not. And, you know, what is the process like? What is the experience like? And what should I think of from the client's perspective? So it's partly for clients who are curious, although it's probably a little longer than most clients want to dedicate to preparing for a reading. But it's also for readers, and to just kind of understand what I think my philosophy is around working with clients, and how that should go, as compared sometimes to how it does go. And then the last of the 3 free ebooks is what I call Elemental Overlap. And it's just kind of, again, a short, I think it's like 30 pages, look at how I've come to see and work with the elements, and how I've kind of evolved from elemental dignities into what I do now, which is really working with the quality and the intent or the motivation of the element. You'll see in the thing when you look at it. And like what happens when there's like a really strong pairing of elements where they're almost or are equally matched. You know what I mean? So are they adversarial, or is it that they're working together to create something? And so that book is out there again. All 3 of them are PDFs. They're all free. They're all at the bottom of my website on the homepage. So the blog is, you have to go to the menu at the top of my homepage that will take you to the Fool's Journal. The ebooks are just right at the bottom. The other thing that's new on my page are just public reading dates that I've got going, although I think I need to update them. But I'm reading pretty regularly at some local places now. And so if you want an in-person reading with me, it is now possible to do that at various events. So I think that's everything kind of me related. Anything else that is valuable for you to know? I don't think so. So I'm going to stop this particular recording and save it because I noticed that the video is starting to lag. So let's make this Act 1, Act 2 situation. All right, so here we are, Act 2. Act 2 of our show, as Ira Glass would say. Thoth Girl Summer, which was my cheeky little name for working with the Thoth deck. I'm just tidying some space around me so that I can show you some booky books. And so it was an interesting summer for a lot of reasons. So I guess this is still kind of personal update time, but I was tested and diagnosed with ADHD, and so the summer has partly been about kind of getting that treated, because it had kind of gotten to me to a point where I was just like really constantly angry all the time because I couldn't concentrate. So it was a thing. It was a problem. Anyway, so this summer I also spent working with the Thoth deck, which I did some videos earlier, comparison videos. Like, don't worry, I'm not now like an Aleister Crowley stan. I still think he's an asshole. I still think he said a lot of racist shit. I think he did a lot of sexist and misogynistic shit. Like, not someone I have any interest in emulating. A broken clock is right twice a day, right? We know that cliche. So sure, there are things that sort of come from his oeuvre, for lack of a better term, that I do think are interesting and that seem like they have some, currency or truth to them. But it's also not that, like, it's not like anything else no one ever did. You know what I mean? And I think for Crowley folks, my recommendation to you, if you're watching this, and I know that no one wants to hear some like person who thinks Crowley's an asshole give advice, but like listen to your critics, because what's going to happen over time, I think, is that the shitty things that Crowley did are going to be impossible to ignore. But like if you can reconcile that shit and like say, okay, here's what we've learned not to do, and here's how, like, is it Theosophy? Is that his thing? I can't remember what his thing is. I know the Ordo Templi Orientis is one, and then there's, I'm guessing I can't remember. It doesn't matter. I guess it does matter to people who practice it, but it's not to diminish what is special to people about that. It's to say, okay, yeah, Crowley was a racist. Yep, Crowley may have, and likely did commit sexual assault, and he is part of a long line of well-known names who we now look back on and say, boy, that was fucked up. What can we learn from that? Right? So rather than trying to apologize for it and paper over it, my recommendation is that if you really want that stuff to be resonant into the future, don't run from the problematic shit. Learn from it and embrace it and say, here's what he should have done. And here's what we're going to do now. Right? And maybe temples, following Crowley's influence, should make part of their mission anti-racist work and make like resources available for victims of sexual assault. Right? Like, for me, don't run from it, because it's in the world anyway, right? Like, Crowley is influencing people. And actually, we're at a moment where a lot of white supremacists are finding a lot of currency with Crowley because of the racist shit he wrote. So, and this is happening too in Norse mythology, right? White supremacists are using that too. So my thing is, don't run from that, call it out and work through it and use it as an opportunity to change the world. So that's my thinking on that. I am not a Crowley fan. I am, however, a fan of Lady Frida Harris's artwork, and that is partly what set me on this path. Whoops. And it's partly the podcast Fortune's Wheelhouse, which I just one day happened to be listening to, and took out the deck and started looking at it. So, as I do, I tend to hyper-focus on things, and I will concentrate my learning on things. And what it does is it's a useful thing because it helps me narrow down. Like, there's so many things to read and learn about that when I get kind of hyper-focused on a specific thing, it helps me narrow down, right? Because, okay, I'm reading Thoth books this summer, which I read a lot of, not exclusively. So that's what I thought I would do, is just share with you what I read and how I felt about them. So Fortune's Wheelhouse sort of was the on-ramp there, and it's a great podcast. I'm not done with it, but I've listened to all the majors, and that's where, that's sort of where I landed on doing this. And so the first thing I read, so some of these I read on ebook, and some of them I read as paper books, and so I've got a mix of both of them here to show you. And so obviously the first thing I read was can I get to the cover? Whoops. Cover, please. Cover girl. So it's the sort of classic Thoth Tarot by Lon. Can I? This always does. It's so weird. Anyway, this is what the cover looks like. It's the Princess of Pentacles. Let's see. Let's see, camera, if I can, because this is going to keep being a thing. Hold, please. I don't believe that I can switch. Okay, so you can see the chaos behind me. So here's the cover of the book. It's the Lon Milo DeCat book, and I had started reading that years before, and it's pretty good. I mean, he loves Crowley, and more power to him, right? And so I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. Like, I think it's as understandable and clear a book on this deck as one can get. And then I read the Snuffin book, which I will admit I actually found a little bit of an easier read. Both are pretty phallocentric, which of course so was Crowley. Like, everything's a phallic symbol in this book in particular, but like, in fairness to the author, it's probably what Crowley intended. But this was just a little bit clearer and easier for me to make sense of. But both are quite good. So this is the Snuffin book. Both of these get referenced pretty regularly by T. Susie Chang and M.M. Moline on the podcast. I think next was Tarot Mirror of the Soul. This is a new edition of an older book, part of Weisser's sort of Weisser classics. The original version of this had a black cover with the text in white, but the same deal with the card. And I liked this a lot too. It's very sort of, it's card meaning, but I enjoyed it. I think the way that Gerd Ziegler contextualized the cards. I think if I were going to say, like, if you want a classic sort of Thothy book, this is probably the one I would start with, because I found it the most accessible from, like, my vantage point. So I actually quite enjoyed that. I don't love books that are just, like, descriptions of cards and meanings, because I have a hard time concentrating. But yeah, it was pretty good. Then finally I was like, well, I probably should give up and read what the fuck Crowley said about his own deck, which was fairly inconsistent. Like, he says one thing someplace and another thing, like, he's just not with it, and probably he was just stoned a lot of the time if he wasn't being a pain in the ass, literally, to whoever he was fucking. It's not as difficult to read as I thought it would be, for the most part. There are chunks that I just had to skip because I just found them inscrutable. But it wasn't as bad as I anticipated it being. So I mean, it's like I read Waite's book I read the Pictorial Keys, so I figured I'd read this. It was also kind of shockingly expensive. Like, this paperback is $30. Like, for just a pretty normal trade paperback. Like, that's a lot of money to me for a book that could probably stand to be retypeset, at least. So if you're a Crowley fan, nothing I'm saying is important to you. But yeah, it was interesting. It was, I guess, you know what I mean? It was interesting. I did read a lot of this. This I actually didn't like as much as I thought I was going to. And I don't know why. I just had a hard time connecting with it, but this is also a classic. This is what a lot of people who aren't like Crowley enthusiasts start with, and I think that makes sense, but I just didn't quite get along with it as much as I thought. And then this is a book from US Games, which is, I think, a translation. And this was interesting, too. Also kind of maybe more expensive than it has any right to be. But it's interesting. And sort of well laid out. And there were chunks of it that I found really fascinating. The thing that I would recommend, honestly, to anyone who's like, I'm curious about the deck. I don't like Crowley. I don't want to deal with like his writing and the esoteric stuff. Or you're like, I'm esoteric agnostic, but like I'm okay learning about it. But it's not my thing. Or like you want to understand it from like a modern perspective, what in theory the creators were doing. I would recommend this book, which I will show you as soon as it downloads. And it's not going to probably be a surprise to anyone who got this far. So it's Tarot Deciphered. Again, this is kind of the book version of the podcast by T. Susan Chang and M.M. Moline. And I read this kind of in conjunction with the podcast. And to me, if you're going to take a little journey, that's the book. Tarot Deciphered. It's big. Like, it's over 600 pages, which is why I have it as an ebook. But it's worth it. So that's my recommendation. Really is, that's what I would start with. And honestly, if I weren't doing this kind of crazy deep dive, I might have ended there too. But like I said, I hyper focus. I think that was everything I read on this deck. Working with the deck. I read a little bit of I did. I read The Magic of Aleister Crowley by Lon Milo Duquette too, which again I just found. Here's my thing about esotericism, and I think I've finally been able to articulate what bugs me about it, is the focus on not being human, like the focus on non-living experience, right? The idea of kind of elevating beyond human lived experience. And I don't necessarily have any problem with that, right? Because I think a lot of humans, that's what we're trying to reach. I think it's the disengagement from the life that we live. And the disengagement with what's happening on Earth right now. And I think what esotericism often does is it gives people looking for an excuse to disengage, the excuse to disengage from life. And I can understand why we would want to do that. I think that the focus on high magic at the kind of snobbish expense of folk magic, for lack of a better term, is typically indicative of the snobbiness and pretentiousness of esotericism. And so it's kind of a combination of disengagement from the reality of life, a responsibility to each other on this planet and to the planet, and a level of disdain for what common people have used magic for throughout history, which is healing and longevity and love and justice. I don't really like to talk about my own spiritual journey, because I think it's private, partly, and partly because I have some, some shame around it, and there's aspects of it that have been heavily influenced by Black culture, which I don't want to make it sound like I'm appropriating, but I've spent a lot of time reading about hoodoo and voodoo in New Orleans and the United States, Zora Neale Hurston's work, and others, contemporary folks. And the reason why I took that path and studied this, even though it's not my culture and could arguably be called a closed practice, is that it's the first time I encountered a magical tradition that has justice and social engagement at its core. And so I allowed that to inspire me. So that's kind of where that comes from. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, it's not to say that I don't have appropriative and problematic practices as part of my own spiritual work. What I guess I'm saying is that I try to keep that private. And I also try to make it my mission through my spiritual, that my spirituality is liberation centered, right? And so I've been influenced by other spiritualities that focus on that. And of course, hoodoo in particular comes out of enslavement and human trafficking. And so it is fully liberation centric. And so from the writings on that practice have I learned to center liberation in my own work, if that makes sense. And that's also partly just to separate myself too from, like, a lot of when I started studying and exploring, like, witchcraft when I was in my 20s and early teens, or late teens rather, there was something missing. And it was that. And only in the last few years, honestly, I think witchcraft has always been political, but typically sort of very white feminist in a lot of, not all, spaces. And that wasn't connecting for me. And only in the last couple years, with books by folks like Kellyanne Maddox, the Missing Witches podcast, their book New Moon Magic, Queering Your Craft, books that are unabashedly engaged in liberation, have I started to feel like, oh, maybe there is a space for me in witchy areas, right? And I don't know what to call myself, but that's what that's done, though, is it's made me feel really strongly that high magic that disengages from life is a privileged escapist tool. And as a fortune teller, which is what I call myself, as a diviner, I feel like my responsibility is to the client, and to seeing them and their life experience as clearly as I can, and to never bypass it, to never give shitty advice, like, just manifest it, and to not diminish the fact that, like, day-to-day lifey stuff matters, and we can only kind of focus on the spiritual when we're not starving, or trying to get our mental health in order, or dealing with a piece of shit predatory boss. You know what I mean? Like, when there is shit happening in our lives that's really impacting us, just manifesting it ain't gonna cut it. And so esotericism frequently divorces itself from that reality. That's how I feel. Anyway, I'm sure I will get added for that, but that's how I feel. And reading about it so much this summer proved my bias correct. So I haven't found anything to counter that in these books. And my book maybe is a reaction to that too. I don't know. But that's kind of where I am. To me, the mundane is sacred as much as, I don't know, Nuit, right? Like, the sky, we are life, we are living, so that's sacred too. And And maybe part of our mission as readers, deep down anyway, should be to make people feel like they can understand the day-to-day better, so that they have time and opportunity to think about life's bigger questions. Like maybe that's the underlying thing, is that we as diviners can help people make peace with or make sense of the bullshit, so that they can have their own spiritual journey. And as readers, our spiritual stuff is divorced from the reading, right? Like, our cosmology doesn't matter in those moments, by which I mean it's about them. It's about the client. So anyway, now I'm rambling. But that's why I don't dig the esoteric stuff, in a nutshell. And that's why I wish we could have more honest conversations about that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. Like, if that's your path, great. We can't, I don't think, to become good ancestors or whatever it is we're working toward, get to do that without also trying to make the space around us safer, healthier for our neighbors, right? So that's what I'm saying. So, yeah. In terms of the deck itself, I have gotten brilliant readings with it this summer, and most of the clients I've worked with have been in awe of the paintings. I typically use the large size cards, and the reactions have always been really positive. The deck reads amazingly, and actually I've come to really love two of the changes that they made, which is I prefer adjustment to justice. One reason being that I think it's more active. Justice to me in modern life is a bit of an imaginary idea. It is a concept that is used to control people by people in power. That's justice in modern life, at least in the so-called United States. Adjustment is something we're always doing because of the lack of justice. And then the other change I actually quite like is the aeon, or the era, or the eon, however you want to pronounce it, because again, it's like pop culturally relevant in a way. It's like I'm in my aeon era, but it's this idea of like, here's this new time. Here's this new moment. And it's a little bit more specific to me than the sort of Christianized justice card. And then there's actually quite a lot that I love the paintings. I think really the only painting I don't like is the Eight of Wands. So, still using the deck rather a lot, in addition to the Sun and Moon, which last year at this time became kind of my primary reader. So, and it also really forced me in a weird way to bring in the astrological associations, which I'd never done before. And I've even found that useful, even though I think most of them are wrong. So anyway, I'll stop rambling. This has been going on for a while now, but that's what's going on in my world. That's my little recap of Thoth Girl Summer. And hopefully have more videos coming soon. Should have a new class coming soon too. So stay tuned for that. If you don't follow me on Instagram, that's where most of my updates happen. So just visit my Instagram at Tom Benjamin Tarot. Follow me there. And you should be up to date. I don't really have a newsletter because I'm lazy. So I think that's it. Take care, be good, and we'll talk soon. Bye.